Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Give me one
Mhm.
moment and I'm going to share the screen. It's good to have you all back. And here we are. And hopefully you can see this. So this, of course, is Parshat Yitro, the Parsha of called Yitro, the name of Moses' father-in-law. And we are actually, it's famous. Exodus chapter 20 is a reference that refers to the Ten Commandments. That's where you find the first mention of the Ten Commandments in the Torah. And we are actually in the midst of them. And we're working our way through these Ten Commandments. And so we're in the midst of, the fact that God is a merciful God, but also this is the commandment of not bowing down and worshiping idols, and that there are consequences for doing that, for idolatry. And right now, so we've just discussed the fact that those consequences can bear themselves to the fourth generation. Shileshim, the third, Va'al Ribeim, and to the fourth, Lesonai, to those who hate me. So God, the first two commandments are mentioned in the first person. God is speaking in the first person. And so there's an understanding that the Israelites actually heard God speaking at, when those Ten Commandments were given. V'oseh chesed lalafim, going on, and who performs chesed, kindness, la'alafim, to thousands, lohove, lohavai, to those who love me, ulashomrei, and just going on, because that's Aramaic underneath, that's okolos, mitzvotai, and those who guard my commandments. So God will do chesed, kindness, perform kindness to those, and there will not be retribution for those who do that. And of course, that leaves open to the whole idea of what it is to love God, and of course, to be observing, guarding God's commandments, which one may do consciously or actually unconsciously, not realizing that what they are doing actually is a response to divine commandment. But I believe it was Rabbi Akiva who said that there was an additional level of love that God gave the Jewish people in them realizing that they are performing divine commandments. Now, this is interesting because Rashi is quoting from the verse, and he says, Notzer chesed. And if you look at the Hebrew, it doesn't say Notzer chesed. It says Ve'oseh chesed. So that in a way, maybe this particular Rashi comment is not in the right place. And I realized that as I was preparing this lesson, the word notzer means to preserve, right? To preserve kindness. And I thought, well, I know that there are two places where the Ten Commandments are mentioned, and possibly in Deuteronomy, where the commandments are mentioned, the Ten Commandments are quoted a second time. The wording is a little different, and I looked there, and no, it wasn't. It also said V'oseh chesed. And then I also remembered that there was another place later on in Exodus, after the Israelites worshiped the golden calf, and Moses has to appeal to God to spare the Israelites from destruction. And that there it also mentions, in mentioning what are called the 13 attributes of mercy, that possibly it says Notzer Chesed there. And sure enough, in Exodus chapter 34, verse 7, it does say Notzer Chesed, who preserves kindness, as opposed to Oseh Chesed, performs kindness. Well, Rashi's explaining Notzer Chesed here. She'adam oseh l'shalem, she'adam oseh, that is to say, who preserves kindness that a person would do, l'shalem schar al ad la'alafim. So it says to repay the reward to 1,000 generations, alpaim, I think it says alpaim door, so or alfim door, to 1,000 generations. So if you calculate that God will punish to the 4th generation, but will do kindness to the 1,000th generation, nimtzeit, you can figure it out, midah tova, that God's good quality, that God's quality of kindness, yetera, exceeds al midat pranut, over the quality of retribution, achat al chamesh meot, right? It's 500 times God's quality of kindness exceeds God's quality of retribution, of justice, you might say, right? Quid pro quo, accountability, by 500 times. Shezo la'arba'a dorot, because the quality of retribution only lasts until 4 generations. Vezo alafim, and this to 1,000 generations. And of course, if you divide 1,000 by 4, you get, it's alpaim would be, it would be 2. I think so. I think he means, because it says alafim, it's plural, it's considered 2,000, right? If my mathematics is correct, right? 4 times 500 is 2,000. So it is alafim, which is plural, and the minimum of a plural is 2. That's the smallest number you can have to have a plurality. So that's why it's 1 in 500 times. Something to meditate actually on, I believe, as to what the implications are regarding how God has to handle the world. And I think it's trying to give us some sort of way in which to have some insight regarding that. Lo tisa et shem. So that's the end of that 2nd commandment. Lo tisa et shem Hashem Elokecha lashav. You shall not bear, literally it means to carry, the name of the Lord your God, l'shav, for no purpose, in vain. In other words, this is the commandment that says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And what exactly that means. Let's just finish the sentence. Excuse me. Ki lo yinakeh Hashem, for God will not, Yinakeh means to clean out. In other words, will not overlook. That it's not something that can get overlooked. Et asher yisa et shmo, the person who bears his name, lashav, again in vain. And we're going to need to see what's involved here, and perhaps why there is no mercy attributed to this particular issue here. And I think it's because, you may have heard the statement, the seal of God is the truth. So that when you are involved in somehow not utilizing, using God's name in some way that is false or not for any purpose, it's disrespectful in a huge kind of sense. Let's take a look at this. Lashav. So the question is, what is shav? Right? So he says, Hasheni lashon sheker kargamor. So we have this word shav twice, right? Right here, right? And then on the next page, we see again, lashav, the 2nd time. And Rashi's saying is that the 2nd time this word is used, it refers to actually telling a falsehood. In other words, swearing that something that is false by God, saying, I swear that this is the case, knowing and by God that this is the case, and associating God's name with a false statement. But it goes beyond that, as you will see in a moment. So he says the 2nd time, ketargumor, as is mentioned in the Targum, and here's the Targum right here, and it says le shikra, and you can see the word sheker, that there's a cognate between Aramaic and Hebrew right here. So Aramaic, the word is shikra, which means false, lying, etc. Let's go here. Kama de Tamar, as is stated, I Ezehu Shvuah Shav. So there's a statement in the rabbinic tradition that says, what is an oath, a vain oath, a purposeless oath? Nishba, so this is one case of a Shvuat Shav. Nishba Leshanot et Hayadua. It's where he swears to change something that people know already. Or maybe here, so let's take a look, all right? So, et hayadua, so the example, al amud shel evan, he's talking about a column of stone, shahu shel zahav, that it's made out of gold. So that would be a false oath. He swears that this column of stone is a column of gold, and I think here they're saying that everybody can see that it's a stone, and he's swearing that it's gold, right? Harashon lashon magan ketargumor, and again he's saying, so the first case, remember he's mentioned the second case of shikra, and he says that the first case is lemagana. Here it is, lemagana. And that's the translation of lashav there. And there it means for no purpose. In other words, he's swearing it, okay? And it's false, and everybody can see it's stone, and yet he is swearing that it's gold. That's one example, okay? So that's where it's for no purpose because everybody knows it's stone. They're not going to think it's gold. And here he is swearing that it's gold, swearing by God that it is gold. So, Ze hanishba lechinam ulehevel. So this is an example of the one who swears for no purpose and in vain. Al shel eitz, okay? In other words, so this seems a little bit different, okay? So this says that he swears that it's made out of wood, and it is wood. That's a different kind of swearing in vain. That would be for no purpose whatsoever. Val evan, and regarding stone. So that he says, and he's citing Shavuot, the tractate Shavuot, at page 29a and the Mechilta. So let's go over this one more time and see what we can, what exactly it's talking about, right? Let's go back over this. So, because I may have, okay, so he says the second one is false. So it could be that here, he is a shvuat shav. So what is this the second case is what he's really talking about. And that is, he says, he tries to change something that people know, right? On something that is a fact. So in other words, when you swear regarding a fact, that it is something other than that fact, that is one kind of false swearing. And then if you're swearing about something that everybody sees is the case, and you're swearing that it is what everyone sees anyway, right? That's a different kind of, it's not lying so much, but it is for no purpose because people already see what it is. They already know it. So that's a second type of swearing in vain. So there are two senses in which we need to understand it, and two reasons why there's this word shav twice in this sentence. Going on. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember the Sabbath day. Remember, Zachor, remember. Going on. You can see there'll be lots of lekacho, to sanctify it. There'll be a lot of Torah Tamima on this, right? What is it to remember the Sabbath day, to sanctify it? So that's vague. It doesn't really give you a lot of information in that way. But let's take a look at how Rashi is going to help us understand and put it into reality. Zachor, remember. So he says, Zachor v'shamor. So remember and guard. Because in the second set of Ten Commandments, in the book of Deuteronomy, it doesn't say Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. It says Shamor. It's got a different word. Okay, so he says Zachor v'Shamor, that both the words Zachor and Shamor, B'dibur achad ne'emaru, they were stated in one statement. They were both meanings. And he's going to suggest that in some ways they're contradictory. They don't mean the same thing. But nevertheless, when they were stated, right, this is a mystery, you could say, right? They nevertheless, both words were said at the same time, or both meanings were said at the same time. And he gives examples to help us understand this a little bit better. And he says in this way, so he says in Exodus chapter 31, it says, Mechalaleha. On the one hand, he says, those who desecrate it, this is referring to the Shabbat, Mot Yumat shall be put to death. Shall be put to death. And in the book of Numbers, it says, in Numbers 28, it says, Uvayom HaShabbat shnei kvasim. And he says, and on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs are slaughtered. Now, slaughtering lambs or slaughtering animals for personal use is considered a violation of the Shabbat. It's chalaleha, it's profaning the Sabbath by doing something that can be done on the other days of the week and is not supposed to be done on the Shabbat. And yet, in Numbers, it says that in the temple, they were to offer up 2 lambs on the Shabbat. So here we go. We've got 2 statements that appear to contradict each other. V'chein, he gives another example in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 22. It says, Lo tilbash shatnez. It says, you shall not wear, and shatnez means threads of linen and wool combined. You should not wear clothing that is made up of both wool and linen, right? Wool coming from an animal, linen coming from plants, that there's this combination, this blending of the two together. One is forbidden to do this. It is it's a chok, I would say, right? It doesn't necessarily appear to have any rational basis to it, but nevertheless, it's a commandment. And then right afterwards it says, Gedilim ta'aseh lacha. It says, you shall make fringes for yourself. So in this case, you are allowed to mix wool and linen together. In other words, so the sentence goes as if, even though you shall not wear combinations of wool and linen, nevertheless, when you make for yourselves tzitzit, right, those fringes, you can do it. Again, an apparent contradiction. V'chein, and likewise in Leviticus chapter 18, it says, Ervat eshet achicha. Literally, it means the nakedness of your brother's wife. In other words, that's considered consanguineous and forbidden. That it is one of the relationships that is considered incestuous, and you're not to do it. And in Deuteronomy, in chapter 25, it says, Yevama yavo aleha. It says that her Yavam should marry her, should come to her. And your Yavam is your brother's brother. So in other words, if a woman, it's a specific case where if a woman dies childless, it becomes the obligation of that dies as a widow. Her husband dies and he dies with her being left without a child. His brother is obligated to come and perform this ceremony with his widow and provide a child for him in that sense. And that's a contradiction of this statement that says, under all other circumstances, it's considered incestuous. Ushinemar, this is what is referenced in Psalm 62. Achat diber, he made one statement, Elohim, God made one statement. Shtayim zu shamati, I have been able to learn out 2, in this case, of course, different statements. So this is part, I think, of trying to deepen our awareness and our understanding of of what it is to serve God, and that is the creator of the universe. And also, of course, it's also saying that there are rules, there are general rules, and there are also specific cases where the circumstances are such and are limited, where one might actually be doing the very opposite. So, for example, the last example of a Yavam, right, of that situation, that in that specific case, the law regarding the incest of a brother-in-law, it does not apply. So, just as an example. So again, I think it's a very strong statement regarding the nature of how circumstances alter cases. He's talking now about some language here. Zachor, right? This word Zachor. What form of speech is this? He says Lashon Pa'ul. It is an infinitive or a gerund, okay? We'll see. So in this case, like, remember. It's not so much and I don't believe it's so much of an imperative, although possibly it can be understood as an imperative. But Rashi, I think, is understanding this more as an infinitive or a gerund. So he gives, because look at the examples he's going to give. So he says in Isaiah Kaf Bet, Isaiah 22, Achol v'shato, eating and drinking. And in Samuel, second book of Samuel, chapter 3, haloch uvacho, going or walking and crying. V'chein petrono. Okay, so how do we understand this term zachor here? He says we can understand it as tnu lev, pay attention, diskor tamid et yom HaShabbat. So when it talks about remembering here, it means keeping in mind, right, paying attention, always tamid, the Sabbath day. Always have the Sabbath day in mind. She'im nizdamen lecha chayfetz yafeh, because if you happen to come upon some lovely object, tahei mazmino l'Shabbat, you should set it up, you should prepare it for the Shabbat. Or it can also mean, literally the hazmin means to invite it. Well, it may not be to invite, but in other words, it's to look at it and say, this is something I'm going to use on Shabbat. If you see a particularly lovely item of food, or an item, even if it's a regular physical item, it's a way of remembering. So it's saying, by remembering the Sabbath, right, you are sanctifying it, you're making it special, if we understand the word sanctified essentially to have that meaning. So, going on, Sheshet Yamim Ta'avod, you shall labor for 6 days, Va'asita kol melachtecha, and you shall perform all your labor. You shall work for 6 days and perform all your labor, Va'asita kol melachtecha, and perform all your labor. Keshetavo Shabbat, the idea being that when the Sabbath arrives, Yahei be'enecha, you should consider it. In other words, it should appear, literally appear in your eyes. Ke'ilu kol melachtecha asui. It should look to you as if all your labor has been performed. In other words, shelo taharer achar melachtecha, that you should give no thought to the labor that you're performing on Shabbat. Your mind should totally remove itself from all the responsibilities and other things that may be ongoing and pressing, to try and get them off your mind and imagine to yourself, you got it all completed. It's all done. So that's how we understand this particular verse. V'yom hashvi'i, but the 7th day, Shabbat Lashem Elokecha, it is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Lo taseh kol melacha, you shall not perform any labor. Ata, you, uvincha, and your son, uvitecha, and your daughter, avdacha, your servant, v'amatcha, and your maidservant, uvhemtecha, and nor your animal, right? Keep going. V'gercha, nor the stranger or the proselyte, the person who's not Jewish, asher b'sha'arecha, who is in your gates, who is in your community. Let's take a look at the Rashi. See what we've got. Okay, so we start it right here. Ata uvincha uvitecha, you, your son, and your daughter. Elu ktanim, right? In other words, referring to minors. Or eno ela gdolim, or after all, your son and your daughter. It means your minor daughter or your minor son. Okay, and he's saying, well, no, but maybe it just is referring to your son and your daughter. And of course, they could be grown up; they're not necessarily minors. Amarta, right? You can say, so you can say the reason is Hare kfar muzharim heim. But the point is, if they're adults, this is already something that's the very commandment itself. Just as it's referring to you as an adult, it's referring to them as adults. So they're having it mentioned here, Ela loba, so the whole purpose of mentioning your son and your daughter, Ella, the reason that's being mentioned isn't just to tell you the relationship, lahashir gdolim al shvitat haknanim. It comes to tell you that you are responsible to make sure that your minor children or that minors observe the Shabbat as well. That just because they are not bar or bat mitzvah doesn't mean they don't observe the Sabbath. You are still commanded to make sure, as the adult, to make sure they observe the Sabbath. V'zehu sheshaninu, and this is reference to what we have learned in the tractate Shabbat on page 121. Katan sheba lichbot, right? That if a minor wants to come and put out a fire, right, or turn off the oven or whatever, ein shomin lo, you do not pay attention to him. You do not let him do it. Mipnei sheshvitato alecha, because his Sabbath, his observance of the Sabbath is now dependent on you. You're responsible for his observing the Sabbath. And I'm going to stop here, and with God's help, continue tomorrow with the Sabbath. So I'm going to stop the share. And it's good to see you all here. Good. Any thoughts, any comments? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.